This is Pops with a momentary training video for you. Draft control. Specifically, I'll try this without my glasses. Up close reading is not one of my favorite things. And I'm going to put in here a valve. Well, valve spool. We'll play with that. That's right there. See that? No. Towards the middle of the page. Well, that's right. There's a nub. That nub's a connection point. Now, just going to run up an arm here. Going to put a little angle in it so it looks interesting. In the middle of an angle, going to put a dot for another link. And in that link, we're going to connect a lever. So this one's going to have a bunch of connections and the final knob. How can I do this properly? Yeah, we'll do it this way. Okay, what do we have here? You have your lever knob, you have your friction point, and a link going to the center of this link to the valve. Pull the lever, what happens now? Absolutely nothing. The valve's in a body, the arm is here, and it just flops back and forth. However, at the top here, what we're going to hook is, I'm going to make a funky spring and a connector through the spring. There you go. Now you have draft control. There's your top link. Now your bottom link's going to be here. Your 3-point hitch arm's going to come out here, 2 of them, and then you're going to have your third link here. As your plow moves, plow's hitched here and here. But as the plow hits something, or mow, or anything else that's cultivator, drag, disc, when it hits something, when it's working down here, it pivots here and pushes in. When it pushes in, it can't move here. So then it moves the valve. Now, you can set the valve up on the opposite end, however you want to do it. And a lot of machines, the valve is out here in the back, but I just put it there just to say, to show you how the linkage operates with your draft control. Now, position control. What is that? Well, if I add in here your rock shaft for lifting, 2 big arms coming out here, and they're going to go down to the lower links. Big dang rock shaft. And that rock shaft has a cam on it in almost every case. Let's do it another way. Let's do a link. Because a lot of companies do it with a solid link. Ford used a cam. Many do. But here's the difference. We're going to change. Now we're going to make a change. All right. What have we done? Okay, this is disconnected now. You have a roller here and a roller here. Now, I don't have it hooked up so it operates properly, but you get the idea. As it comes up, it pushes the link. Just like this pushes the link and makes a chain. I know, it's not exact representation. However, what happens when you move the lever one way or the other is the design of it is there's a spring in the spool to hold it. You're talking action reaction. In some cases you get the point. It's geometry. And your draft control and position control, when they're set up with rollers, can operate independent of each other. Now in the Ford, you flip a lever, it takes the position control completely out of the equation, and you're only operating on the draft control link. You have no position control at all. And what it does is it takes your lever that was moving everything on the position control link, pull the position control back, and there's a little bit of a difference between the two. Not a lot, but enough that now your draft control, the link hits that, and your lever is only adjusting by draft control. So what that big old spring does up here, sitting at the old tractors were what they call single sensing, or one sensing. They have dual acting and single acting. The single acting is the spring holds it out here, And the heavier the load it pushes against the spring, it pushes your link. Okay? And if your lever is where it wants to be, then it moves, opens and closes the valve at the bottom, pivoting around what the lever links to. Now put position control in there next to it. And actually on the Ford, one is here and one is here. But you flip the lever and the position pulls back and it goes against the draft control only, and draft is the only thing operating it. So every time you move the lever, it sits here and you move it. But what's it do to the valve? Not much. Because it's either all the way up or all the way down because of the way they have the links designed. Draft control is like that on all the machines, and the draft doesn't do anything until the appropriate time. And what you're doing with your lever is when you come all the way up, you're overriding the link. You're actually hitting the draft control and forcing the link in because there's a space between the draft and the lever on the TO20, TO30, 8N Ford, 9N Ford, and I think the pre-1950 Ford 8Ns. 50, 51, 52, or 51 and 52. Someplace in there was a break where the early 8Ns were single acting draft control only. And then after that, when they went to the side mount distributor in the engine, then they had the position control lever, your operating lever for the 3-point hitch, and down here by it was a little position control or lever that would take the position control out and put you back to draft. Because you're primarily, as you move the lever, position control, the positions, the arms. When you take that out of the link, now you're totally on a draft control link, and that spring is what's going to do your adjusting for you. So, TO20, TO30, 8N, early 8N, 2N, and 9N Fords. You have draft control only. You have the early, that's it. You just have the draft control operating that thing. And the way they design the linkage is as soon as you move the lever off the top, it goes all the way down. Fords have a, I'm not sure about the 8N, but their link is designed with a draft control that nothing happens when it's adjusted properly. The lever comes all the way to the top, the arms come up, and then they hit and push the valve closed. On the 100 series, and I think the late 8N, they have a rod that sticks across the back end of the piston. When the piston comes out, it hits the rod, shuts the hydraulics off because it's at full lift, if everything's adjusted right. So that's one of the things that one of the reasons when you're running your TO20, TO30, 8N, 9N, or early 8N, 9N, 2Ns, that you have draft only. Why can't I control the up and down? It's either all the way up or all the way down. Yes, that is the design of the tractor. Now, it's very simplified. If you get in there, it's quite simple, but you'll be sitting there and, what? No, it's the simplest hydraulic system on the planet. As far as having draft control, you can't get simpler than having draft control. Now you go into your Japanese tractors and some of your early case tractors, they had power up and a light power down. And what did they have to stop? You actually had the 3-point hitch would come up and had a link that would hit the lever, and you could adjust it, and it hit the lever and put it to neutral. Yeah, it was dirt simple. Darn near worthless. No draft. So you'd set the plow and go plowing along. If you didn't put the plow all the way down on your control lever, then it would hold in the position, and if your front wheels went down, the plow came up. Your front wheels came up, the plow went down and bury itself. What a mess. What does draft control do? The nose goes down, well, the plow's riding on that top link. Plow goes down. Nose goes up. What happens? Your draft goes up, and immediately your third link pushes before your plows even have a chance to dig much, and it starts to raise the plow so you can continue through your gullies. The two will operate and flex at that third point. That's your hydraulics, and it works very well when adjusted properly. So that's why they left draft control on the small old tractors, because that was the big selling point of the TO20, TO30, 9N, 2N, early 8N was we'll put a plow on there and show you how a little tractor can chase you down. If you had it adjusted right, your engine tuned in 8N could really impress you. But then again, you got those big old lumbering lugs that they had out there with similar horsepower, 25, and they were monstrosities, and they'd pull another bottom and a gear lower, and it just looked impressive, right? Buzzing across the field. Well, then comes the 8N, you rev it up 1500, 1700 RPM, drop it in second gear, put your plow on the ground while you're buzzing along, and down the furrow you go, and they're like, yeah, well, I did 3 furrows. Yep, and while you did those 3 furrows, that 8N made 2 passes, and 4 just got done. With less fuel, and a smaller tire, and a lot cheaper purchase price. In comes the TO20 and 30 after Ferguson and Ford, Henry Ford II, not senior, but Henry Ford II, got into their squabble. And Ferguson came out with using a Continental engine, Z120, in the 20s, and in the TO30s, a Z129. Not that much more, but just enough to make a difference. However, both of them had a little better torque than the 8N flathead motor. So the 8N was a long-stroke engine, believe it or not. But still, it wasn't designed very well. It was designed for a price point. Well, they got the Continentals, were an excellent engine. Drop those in there, and that little TO20, the little gray Fergie, could do a lot more than a standard 8N or a standard 9N. By the time they got to the early 8N, they had something. But then again, they had the squabble on the lawsuit. Why did they have it? Well, because Ford saw something coming different. As soon as they put position control on the 8N, Harry Ferguson went wild. And they had to come out with a jubilee to get away from patent infringement on the tractors. So that was what the big squabble was, and Ford just came up with a better hydraulic system than Ferguson had. Just plain better, but Ferguson wouldn't abandon it for one main reason, in that it was a precise control of the system, but that wasn't all of it. The Ferguson system was kept for years because it had another point to it that no other tractor in the market would have for decades, was horsepower absorbing pumps, or in this case, horsepower limiting pumps. Well, what do I mean? Well, as soon as that lift was at the top, the valve shut off. But the Scotch yoke pump never stopped turning. It shut the suction off on the pump and would allow the oil in the pistons to cavitate. Well, the whole pump was riding in oil. So the pistons are going back and forth cavitating the oil that's in there. And it would slip by the rings and such. And yeah, it was a stress on the pump to a point, but there was almost no horsepower drain on the engine. You had a little bitty, 2.5, 3 gallon a minute pump, 4 tops in the bottom of that pan. So when it started cavitating, it took a little power. But I mean, you're driving all day long. What'd the pump do? It didn't pump anything. Nothing. The suction side was shut off. What did it? Yeah, they were steel rings until later, and those steel rings had small gaps in them, and any oil that was needed would pass in and out that ring a little bit at a time. That was it. And that would be all. If they had a way to turn the pump on and off, that really would have been something. But they could turn, rotational and drive-wise. But the hydraulics were shut off at the suction side, so the pump pumped no oil, moved nothing, and didn't take any horsepower away from the engine and tractor and driveline itself. Just minute to be able to turn it over mechanically. That was something why they kept it going for decades, where they could say, we have a pump that uses nothing, pumps no oil, while everybody else had open center system pumps. But Deere went to a closed center pump with a pressure compensator and a charge pump, and complicated their system beyond belief, because now you had to have an unload valve for startups, or the pump would go to full pressure immediately while you're trying to crank it and start it. Didn't work. They had a lot more complication to their system that the simple Ferguson system didn't. You got your 40-20 sitting there, or your 30-20, and here comes the 285 Massey Ferguson, just a little less horsepower than the 40-20 and considerably more than the 30-20, and far better operating hydraulics than the John Deere, and more reliable, I might add. But they did some funky stuff with piggyback hydraulic pumps. They tried to keep everything contained in that one housing, and they come up with these drives that, and Cessna built the pump to Massey Ferguson specs. The pumps held up okay, but if like the old tractors, if you didn't change your oil, those aluminum body pumps did not hold up well. So when they complicated the systems, a lot more problems occurred. Just an FYI, why in the world did Ferguson go for so long pushing his system? Well, because it was simple, reliable, and it stayed simple. Well, now when you add on position control of the pump, you add on horsepower, you add on flow rate, Ferguson's system wasn't going to keep up with anything much over 35 horsepower very well without a major redesign. And by the time you got to the 285s and 1085s, they were all A-line tractors built off of the TO35 line from Massey Harris Ferguson days. And then that was their selling point, was they had a minimal horsepower pump, I guess you would call it. And all the way up through, that pump worked precise and careful, but it was when they kept adding things on that the system just couldn't quite operate anymore. By the time you got to the 285 and 1085, they had sometimes two piggyback pumps. Yeah, one to operate your what they call it, multi-power, and your hydraulic PTO. They'd have another pump on there for power steering, and sometimes that power steering pump would have a flow divider in it to run power steering and remotes. And I've been reading where they had it where instead of two pumps inside of the aluminum housing, they had one with a flow divider to operate power steering, multi-power, and PTO, and go through a cooler up front. So they've had a bunch of iterations with the things. I've had a few of the tractors apart and repaired in the distant past. The last one I worked on was for Ken Stoutland Farms. I think, what was that, Ken? Conlin Road out in Canajoharie Township. Actually not too far up out of Sprakers either, the little hamlet. So that's about the last of those systems I worked on then, and that was interesting when you got to split everything apart. There was a lot of stuff I had to do that tractor that year. PTO seals, PTO bearings, a bunch of stuff, and we had that back into that tractor gutted and torn apart. But the 285 is a solid tractor. 1085 is a good tractor, but they're all the same problem. If you don't service these things regular, there's no actual serious filter in there. If you change your oil like you're supposed to, these things last. But few farmers wanted to do that every year. If it's a heavy use tractor, your primary tractor, you should change your rear hydraulic oil in particular, but your rear oils and all of that twice a year. You'd say, but it doesn't get to the hours. No, but it gets to the age. The oil, you won't believe it, but oil ages. Not so much for the base oil itself, but for the package that's in it. The chemicals and additives and wear materials that they put in there. They'll settle out. And what do you have? Naked oil. If it sits too long, it's the same problem as using it and wearing it out, if not worse. So then your detergents get neutralized from the moisture in the air and the crap that comes in with the moisture. Change your oil often. So it's expensive. It is. I'm not going to disagree with you. But let me tell you, even at my rates, it's cheaper for you to change the oil. Just some words for those of you out there that still have those Scotch yoke systems. And also why so many people on the Ferguson sites have been complaining they have only up or down. That's correct. You have only up or down. Last thing I'll say before I go is you have your TO20 and 30, and you've been with me for the 20 minutes now. Is that it? Yeah, it's showing 20 minutes. And what do you need to do? Well, there's only two things you can do. One of them is if you're running, say, cultivator or whatever, you're going to need gauge wheels. So, but the draft control, the draft can handle it. But I'm just giving you an idea that to keep the cultivators from going too deep, because the draft that you set, it gets to soft ground, sometimes goes too deep. You put your gauge wheels on there until you have a draft problem. Your gauge wheels are going to be a lot better. Your mowers, what are you going to do for the mower? Well, same thing. You either have to have a trailer mower, a gauge wheel mower, or you're going to do what my buddy did with his brush hog. From the third link, you're going to put a wide chain, or a wide pin. Put a couple of plates in there, pinned to the pin, and you can do it with a keyhole, or you can do it with a bolt, nut, washer, whatever. But what you're looking for, the keyhole works better because you can make adjustments right on the fly. And what's the keyhole? A big hole the chain can go through, and a slot that the chain can be turned sideways and lock in there, similar to what they do on dump trucks for their tailgates. And with a keyhole and 2 plates, you can run the chain down to 2 other plates that are on your third link out here. Slide the plate on here with the welded link going up to the keyhole. Get your mower, put a block of wood or something under the mower and set it to the height you want. Set your chain to the height that you want, as close as possible. And you can use a 1/4-inch chain in most cases for these tractors, TO20s and 30s, so it's lightweight, and it'll have, the smaller the chain, the more adjustments you'll have. Even possibly small length 3/16, but make sure it'll handle a couple of 100 pounds, because you're going to hit stuff and it's going to crash. And you could experiment with that, but 3/16, 1/4-inch chain, put a block under your mower to set the height that you want it at. Set your chains and the links from each side. You're golden. They say, well, that just sounds, but that's what they used to do. In fact, a buddy of mine bought a mower specifically for his tractor. It was an early 8N that didn't have draft control, or didn't have position control on it. And he found all the links and the connections for it to change how his hydraulics operated manually. And he says, I ain't doing that. And that's when we came up with the idea of chains. And then he went looking and found in many instances where it was actually recommended to use chains as your lowering stop. So you can bring it all the way up, but you have to be careful with a brush hog. Why? Because the brush hog hitch is here, but one of the problems is if your hitch pins aren't above the mower deck itself enough, when you lift, your third link is loose so that the mower can flex on everyone. It doesn't matter what tractor. If that third link isn't loose, you can get yourself hung up on something. And it mows better and doesn't scalp as much. So what happens is your hitch pin's here, your mower deck's here, and as your tractor nose goes down because you're going up over rise, the mower drops. When it drops, the front leading edge comes up. When you lift the mower, same idea. The tail's going to drop that specific amount that you allowed for travel when you're mowing. When you go to lift it, that comes out underneath the pin, and it can get into your PTO. So you need to set your lift height. You need to do a bunch of adjustments here yourself to be sure. And how much you let that tilt, how it comes up with a PTO. There's a lot of stuff that you may have to actually put in on the third link. While it has that travel in the back, then you may have to have an actual transport. What do I do when it gets all loaded up? Well, you've either adjusted it properly so when you lift it, it's not going to hit the PTO, or you're going to be quick with your adjustments. You're going to lift it and drop it immediately before it hits the PTO. Well, so why do you think the tractors were updated? That's why Henry Ford II looked at Ferguson's system and said, that's nice, we'll keep that, but we're going to make this tractor better. Ferguson left, sued them, and won. In fact, as one guy went and researched and came back to me, and from the non-farming side, he did his intellectual thing and came back and said, Ford just walked into court with his lawyers and fought for everything he could, and then finally, in the end result, pulled out his checkbook and said, how much? He bought the system. Not completely, but he bought out Ferguson, sent him on his way, and Ferguson went to Massey Harris Ferguson after he'd gone through Standard Motors Company and some others. Then he went to Massey Harris, had them build the tractor, become MHF, and Massey Harris Corporation saw the genius of the Ferguson system. Being merged with the Ferguson system, working on his tractors for him, they designed the TO35 apart from Harry Ferguson with, drum roll please, 2-lever, draft, and position control. And it blew Ferguson's mind. He got angry and said, if that's the way you're going to be, and left, and apparently avoided a major lawsuit. I got a feeling there was another buyout. And Massey Ferguson, because they owned the name, laughed all the way to the bank on that one. Until they managed themselves stupidly in the 70s and almost went out of business. So anyway, that's some of the story of why this occurred. Ferguson did not want his system touched. That's why the TO20 and 30 should have had position control and didn't. If Harry would have kept his stupid, arrogant pride quelled and actually looked at what these people were trying to do with their tractors, it would have been a different world. The tractor world would have a completely different view of what it is now. Totally different view. I don't think he would have stayed with Ford no matter how it went. But Massey Ferguson would even be bigger than it is today. If he'd have kept his head out in the fresh air and not stuck up his anal sphincter, Harry would have been seen as something beyond genius. But there you are. So your TO2030, 9N, 2N Fords, early 8Ns. You don't have that little lever under the seat. You don't have two levers over here. Well, if you don't have two levers to control right by the seat and you don't have that little flip lever, you have draft control only. And you'll use your chains and stops and gauge wheels to set things up the way they should. Now, lest you should feel bad about that, John Deere for years had some form of a cultivator lift with a pedal on the A's and B's and some of the other tractors that you hit the pedal, and it was either hydraulics up or hydraulics down, and there was nothing in between. They used similar chain stops and mostly gauge wheels. I ran a plow that had, my brother tried to run without a gauge wheel with a B. It was a disastrous plow. You could plow a flat level field of about a half an acre. Anything with any dips and rolls, that plow would bury itself in the ground or come up out of the ground. So, and that was what they put up against until they came out with the M and the 40, 420s, 430s. Deere was way behind the 8-ball. So, just to give you folks some idea of history, because a lot of people seem to like history on Facebook here, or on YouTube here. And another idea why you need to use other efforts to keep things going. And one of you is going to say, well, why don't I just get a trailer mower to go behind my tractor? It'd be a lot easier. It would, except for one thing. Even though you're on chains or gauge wheels, you do have a lift with your hydraulics. And if you do hit a wad, you can pick it up slightly and take some of that away. Or gently pick it up until you can clear. Like get it up in the air to keep on driving over. So there are still, even though it's minimal, you do still have some advantages over a regular old-fashioned trailered mower behind it. Just to give you folks some ideas. Now, how does a sickle bar mower operate? Just like any other. You're going to set the depth with the chains, how far down you want it to go. You're going to set your ride height here. But when you come to the end of the row, when you pull that lever, it's still going to go up. And when it goes up, if you have things set properly, there's that link that hooks into the drawbar on some. And on another, it hooks to the three-point arm itself. And as the mower comes up, the arm changes angle on the mower, because three-point hitch tends to lift the mower near straight up and down depending on how you have your third link set. And as it does, that angle, there's a link that Ford and Ferguson had on some of their mowers. As it raised, it did this and picked the sickle up, or pushed it, pulled it, however. So that's another reason that's all there. And another reason you have to be careful, your PTO length has to be right. It's like anything else. Once you have it set up properly, it's golden. You're going to love it. But it does take some fumbling and fooling. But if you look at the old tractors, they used to bolt cultivators on them, front and rear. Even with Alice Chalmers' traction booster, they had a one-way hydraulic lift, and they had a draft control connector. But even there, they bolt a lot of stuff on. So for the time period, it was amazing. For today, you're like, oh. Now, fast forward. Go to your Kubotas. The earliest Kubotas brought in here, most of them had a draft control on them. 225s, I think the 185s, and I believe they had a 250 back then. We're talking late 70s or mid 70s in our region anyway. They were in here much earlier, in the 72, 74, somewhere in there. But they had it on them, and then when they figured out that nobody used it anyway, and plowing a garden, if you were careful, most of them bought all-wheel drive tractors. Draft control was pointless. They just changed the depth themselves manually and set it, especially if they had a gauge wheel, which most of the plows for those small Japanese tractors were sold with. So they could put it down in the ground and allow the thing to just float and pull it. Kind of like your garden tractor. Same idea. No draft. Well, you set your adjustments and go. So your trailer plows, they're similar. All of that. Now we're coming up on 31 minutes here in a bit, so I'll stop here shortly. But I wanted to cover all of that so you can get an idea that you can go from tractor to tractor to tractor to tractor to tractor. And even today, Kubotas, a lot of their smaller end homeowner style and what do we used to call them? Hobby farms, tractors, don't have draft control unless you order it, special order it as an option. So what do you do then? This is the same thing they used to do with the old tractors. Set the plow on the ground. Use your gauge wheel. If you have to, use chains. Yeah, that's what you're going to do. That's what they do today. You got a nice level garden. You don't need your draft if you have your all-wheel drive, the proper tires, and the settings. Just plow your garden. My Cub Cadet doesn't have any draft control. I can take that plow, which is a 10-inch plow if I remember right. I can plow 5 to 6 inches deep, barrel right along with it. And it floats. There's nothing there to control the depth except the adjustment of the point of the plow and where I have it hitched on the tractor. So if I have the two set, so when my tractor tips over, this thing actually gets level when it's in the furrow, and the point sucks into the ground, and as it goes down, the entire link, everything goes down, and as it turns, it levels because it pivots here. As it pivots, the point comes from this point to level, and then it floats right across the bottom of the ground level. Now, as a tractor, that nose goes up and down. It's a similar problem to the old Johnny B, I would say. But as you go over a dip, it picks it up. It doesn't put it in the ground. It's different than that old B, because the B link was in front, almost to the front axle. And that made a mess. Nose went down, plow went down. You wanted the opposite. So on your garden tractor with the sleeve hitch, the nose goes down. Yeah, and it starts to raise the plow up. When it goes up, it follows a little better. Excuse me. But the problem still is, when the nose goes up, that point goes down. What's it do to the plow? Puts that sucker right into the ground. So there's quite a few times that a gauge wheel is needed. Just so you folks have an idea how to set things up and why. All right, 33 minutes and 12 seconds. Peace and long life, and may the Lord bless his children. See ya.